Hi there, my name's Ewan. Welcome to my channel. Today I'd like to explore my journey in really kind of understanding, reducing and changing my relationship to anxiety. Because anxiety is a big thing for many of us, particularly for myself. And I'd like to share with you the kind of change of perspective I've had, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, and how that's supported in, I'm not going to say reduce my anxiety, but reduce my understanding of anxiety or my experience of anxiety. And I'd like to take you through kind of how I used to approach it, that kind of worked, but kind of didn't. And you might say now how I approach it today and how that's different and what's changed that and the impact of that. Now, to begin with, I always saw my anxiety as this thing that I had. Let's say I move through the world with a 60% level of anxiety that shows up as fretting or nervousness or worry or fear. There's guilt mixed with anxiety, shame. It's kind of like, this covers a lot of stuff. Fear, you might say. Anxiety is this expression of fear. And, 50-60% of my psychological states is kind of mired with this anxiety. My idea is, I'm going to employ these methods over a period of time to reduce that anxiety, maybe bring it down to 20%. So I'm going to do mindfulness, I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to eat better, less of this, more of that, etc. And over a period of time, my anxiety goes from 50 to 60% of my psychological states down to 20%. Wouldn't that be great? So off I go. I do these things. And some of it has some effect. For sure, there are definitely things you can do that will reduce your level of fear and anxiety, whatever they may be, mindfulness, therapy, etc. But there comes to a certain point in that process where it feels like there's a level of anxiety, a level of charge to fear that it's really hard to kind of make inroads on. So you can get rid of some of the surface stuff. When you get to that core physiological, psychological sort of like saturation, it feels like it's really hard to move. And I'm someone who's done a lot of work on this. I've spent a lot of resources, time, and psychological energy and anxiety about reducing my anxiety. And here I'm at 52, and it still feels like it's kind of there in that kind of way. So what do you do? Well, in that model, you just try harder and do more. But it does come to a certain point where it feels like it's like I'm going around in circles here a little bit. And what's happened is, I guess organically or naturally, my perspective has changed. So that model really sees like anxiety is this thing. It's like an object, and I'm the subject. I'm going to do these things to this object and make it less. So the first problem with that model is, and I spoke about this before on my channel, is there is an anxiety about getting rid of my anxiety. That if you really watch and kind of come back a little bit, that movement towards getting rid of it comes from this fear. And it comes from this sense of not rightness. So to begin with, kind of movement towards getting rid of anxiety is sort of a background aspect of that very same anxiety. So that's not going to work. Anxiety will not get rid of anxiety. The second thing to understand is, in terms of just like a perspective, like a view of anxiety, if I look and say, look, maybe there's a certain level of anxiety that I've come into this world, I've had certain experiences that is kind of baked in, and there are limits to how much I can reduce that anxiety. And I need to kind of come to grips with that this is something I've inherited, and it's something that I have to live with. And then if I do that, then the view then, or the approach, is more about widening my sense of being and abiding in that which is an anxiety that can hold the anxiety, love the anxiety, find kindness towards the anxiety. And that anxiety then exists within a spaciousness rather than it's a problem that I have to fix. Because there's a violence in that. There's a violence in there's just some part of me that's not right and I need to delete it or get rid of it. So this is how my perspective has changed. That as I abide more consciously, more attentively, and more deliberately in the wider aspect of my being, my lovingness, my kindness, my spaciousness, my openness, my awareness, then that anxiety stays the same, but it feels like it's held in a wider, more spacious container. And from that perspective, I don't have to get rid of the anxiety. I don't have to banish it from my being. It has a place at the table. It has a role to play. it has a reason for being there. It's a part of me that alerts me to danger. So developing a different relationship to my anxiety, ironically, or by a weird twist of fate, does feel like it reduces it, but not in that way. It reduces it because now within the wider scope of my being, it feels a little smaller. And that's how it's reduced. But the anxiety itself feels like it kind of like it's still there. I just look at it differently, and therefore I experience it differently. And this approach is just more gentle, it's more sustainable, it's more loving, it's more kind. I think when we kind of move into this violence towards ourselves, it doesn't work. The famous Sufi Ali Ghazali, it's not his name, but I'll bring it up on the screen. Al Ghazali said to get to what you love, you have to be patient with what you hate. And I think anxiety, that really applies to anxiety. We have to develop a patience and a lovingness to these parts of us that we often have so much hostility and antagonism towards. And look, I forget all the time. There's a process of remembering, coming back to this. I find myself in anxious states and I find myself in my anxiety about my anxiety. But when I do remember this, I do remember the lovingness that's in my heart and the expanse of my being, then, I just have a little less fear around my anxiety, in inverted commas. So look, I hope this has helped. Hope this has made sense. If you've got anything you'd like to share about your own experience of anxiety, please leave in the comments. Take care of yourself and bye.